Greetings, cut flower growers, flower farmers, and greenhouse professionals interested in learning about crops you just might want to add to your product mix in the near future. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and this presentation is going to take a deep dive into a key cut flower crop that's an industry favorite for all sorts of reasons. I'm happy to be joined by two brilliant guests with tons of cut flower experience, knowledge, and passion. Joan Mazat is the cut flower business manager at Ball Seed Company, and Bob Croft is a product technical manager with Sakata Seed America, and they both have decades of horticultural experience and a wide range of knowledge. There's a lot to cover when it comes to Lisianthus, and you'll find plenty of food for thought and ideas to explore along the way, so let's get started. Joan, maybe you can frame the discussion and share some reasons why you felt this crop, specifically, was high on your list to tackle in a video, and Bob, why don't you feel free to add your thoughts and then jump right into the presentation.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Bill, and I can't thank you enough, Bob, for joining us. And really, why Lisianthus? The popularity of Lisianthus is just soaring. I mean, people just can't resist it. And it is, though, a very technical crop. And there's things that I think our growers need to know. And Bob has so much information and so much knowledge to really help people be successful. It's one of those tricky ones, but well worth the effort. The flower forms, the colors, it's just exploding. And more knowledge is just all the better for all of us.
Yes, and I think the popularity of Lisianthus is primarily due to its long vase life. You know, it's a simple beauty with great sophistication and really adds a great touch to cut flower arrangements. So I guess I'll get started. Basically, just wanted to go through a brief introduction on Lisianthus. And it is a North American native, which is nice, primarily native to the southwestern United States. And it's generally found growing in arid regions. Though it's in a desert type climate, it's not a true desert plant because it always has access to fresh water through its long taproot system. We can see here the natural range of Eustoma grandiflorum, which is the primary Lisianthus being cultivated. It's also a little bit native to northern Mexico, so you can tell it's a kind of an arid region in the world. The long vase life, generally 14 to 21 days, even longer sometimes, depending on the post-harvest care. So it gives it great popularity and great value for the consumer. As Joan mentioned, there's a wide range of forms, singles and doubles, rose, camellia type, fringed, wide color range. There's also standard and spray types. And at the moment, groups 1 to 3 is the general availability, though group 4s are now starting to come on to the market. As we can see here, the various groups have different places in the season. In the summer, probably group 2 is your best option. In the autumn, group 3, and then winter and spring, group 1. And we'll see why here. It's basically the breeders have developed the groups based on the number of internodes that the plant needs to produce before it flowers. So in the winter, there's going to be less nodes that need to be produced because they take longer to develop under cooler temperatures and lower light conditions. And also the internode length is going to be longer. So basically, if you planted a group 3 in the winter, you'd take an excessively long time to flower because they had to produce more of those nodes. And this is under optimum conditions. So if it's not optimum, you're going to even get even more nodes produced before it flowers. So the idea is to have uniform plant height throughout the year based on temperature, photo period, and light conditions.
That's so crucial because so many people like different colors or different forms, but really focusing on what is the right time of year for which speed is so crucial, right?
Yes.
Amazing.
And generally, it's produced single stem. It gives you a quicker crop and a higher quality crop. Some growers do like to pinch, but one needs to add about 4 more weeks of crop time. And stems are generally thinner and the quality is usually less with less branching. So I'd highly recommend single stem production. But here we can see a pinched crop, and this is probably a better option in warmer climates where you have ideal conditions. Generally, you're going to have a wider spacing with a pinched crop, and the idea is to pinch at the second or third leaf pair to yield about 2 to 3 stems per plant.
Bob, would that mean like if we're harvesting, would that count as a pinch and then the customer is able to get a second crop?
Well, after the first harvest, many growers do pinch and try to recrop. Generally, you get about 70%, depending on the conditions, will recrop for you, but the crop will generally be shorter and not as high a quality. Because basically you're putting more stress and taxing that root system. And sometimes you'll actually end up with a little bit of rosetting after the first harvest because it goes through a bit of a stress condition.
So ideally, one planting, one harvest.
Yeah,
ideally.
Basic schedule. It's a long crop from sowing, basically 22 to 24 weeks. The plug production is anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks, depending on the tray size. This is why the grower needs to place his or her order about 3.5 to 4 months before transplanting, because the plug grower needs to order the seed and be prepared for the sowing. There's a juvenile phase. After Lisianthus is transplanted, it tends not to grow very much because it's putting most of its emphasis on the root system. Then once the roots are established, it'll begin to grow. Generally initiates under ideal conditions around the 9th to 10th leaf pair. And a good indication of that is the leaves become more pointed at that point. So you could watch for that. And then the flower development is about 6 to 8 weeks. So it's all an influence of temperature, photoperiod, and light intensity. And researchers have found that at higher temperatures, Lisianthus has a higher ability to photosynthesize. So many growers, when it gets warm outside, they like to put shade on the roof to reduce the temperature. But Lisianthus can tolerate high temperatures as long as the root system is well established. So one wants to maximize light intensity at that time to promote greater photosynthesis.
Would you agree with me that probably most growers are best suited to allow the plug producers to do that heavy lifting for them to produce that plug? Is, seed sowing yourself, it can be a challenge, right?
Yes, yeah. Lisianthus is a very difficult crop to produce. I think a specialist is best produces it because they can manage the temperatures better, the nutrition better, and the quality of the root system better. It definitely is something that should be left to the specialist. Transplanting, this is the next stage in Lisianthus production. And ideally, one wants an actively growing plug. The root system is so important with the crop. Generally, with 2 pairs of true leaves is the optimum time to transplant. And plugs with straight roots that are not root banded is best. That'll help transition better into the cut flower bed. And you can see here a nice root system that doesn't have any root wrap to it for a really nice transition into the soil. In general, most of the field producers would like a larger plug with a larger plug cell for 2 reasons. One is heavy rains could kind of wash away the smaller plugs, and also drying winds. A larger plug ball soil ball is going to hold more moisture, so one doesn't have to go out 3 or 4 times a day to keep the plug watered. So generally a larger plug cell works for outdoor production in the field. And this is just a trial they did with different aged plugs. It's not always practical, but the whole emphasis of this is to show that the earlier you can transplant, the better. Do not delay transplanting. So you can see a 30-day-old seedling most likely did not have any root wrapping, established much better than an older plug. And we can see here how that translates into the root system. Earlier transplanting, you're going to get a nice tap root, thicker stem. Look at those inner nodes; they're much wider compared to the ones on the left and the right.
So it's really crucial when your plugs are delivered. They got to be a top priority for our growers to make sure we get those planted as fast as they
That's
can.
right, and I've also heard that some growers, this was out of Europe, they'll get the plugs in, and they'll take a ski holiday for the weekend, and the plugs dry out and really stress. So don't let your plugs, sit and get stressed, because you're gonna pay for it. Right. And here's just an example of what happens with an aged seedling. They flower later on shorter plants, so definitely wanting to transplant on time. Rosette, this is not as big an issue if you come from a specialty plug grower, because they have ideal temperature conditions and environmental conditions to avoid this. This is basically a resting stage, a dormancy that's kind of helps the plant survive survival of the species under high temperatures, stressful conditions. Some plants will rosette in the hope that the following year will be more favorable, and they can then reproduce and produce seed. Sometimes one doesn't seed until after transplanting. Maybe it had some stress, high temperature, or some root damage in transplanting. Basically, it's difficult to cure, requires either a cold period, or else gibberellic acid can be applied in mild cases, usually one application at 50 to 100 ppm. And if after 2 weeks you don't see any bolting, then another application can be made. But I really wouldn't recommend more than 2 applications, because it'll kind of stress the plant and you'll get weaker plants.
So if this were to occur to a grower, I mean, do you find it really worth pursuing with these different techniques, or maybe is this just something that maybe they would consider discarding? What are your
Well,
thoughts?
if you have a mix like this, yeah, you'd have to go through and spot spray a few plants, and it probably isn't worth it. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes they will come out of it on their own in a few weeks, if it's a mild situation. So yeah, it's definitely getting those great quality plugs from a specialist is going to avoid these issues.
Yeah, I agree, I
So,
agree.
so now let's go on to bed preparation. We've got these great plugs come in from our plug suppliers. Um, Basically, the first thing that's really important is to have a sterile cut flower bed, because fusarium, which is a soil fungus, is very is kind of prevalent all over, but it really will attack Lisianthus. It's susceptible to this fungus. So the kind of the basic formula comes out of the metric system. It's 60, 60, 60. Basically, it's maintaining 60 Celsius or 140 Fahrenheit at a depth of 60 centimeters or 2 feet for 60 minutes. So that's kind of an easy formula to remember. And this works very well if one wants to continually crop in the same cut flower bed. Another option is soil sterilization for those who do not have steam capabilities. This is a longer process, can take up to 6 to 8 weeks in cooler climates. Black plastic works best in a cooler climate because it can absorb and retain heat better.
Hey, quick question, Bob. Sorry to interrupt you, but a quick question. Would they be better off rotating crops and not replanting Lisianthus in the same area all the time? Is it best to rotate, or is that not really
Well,
effective?
ideally, yeah, rotation is the best option, but one has to wait 6 years in between, and only plant Lisianthus in the same cut flower bed every 7 years. So most growers don't
Oh,
have that
wow.
capability. So steam
No,
sterilization
most
becomes
don't.
critical to produce Lisianthus.
But even if you are sterilizing, should you try to rotate at least as much as you possibly
Yeah,
can?
definitely. Yeah, rotation plus steam sterilization is ideal, and you can really avoid issues with fusarium. Okay, soil preparation. As we can see here, a raised bed works really well for better drainage and root penetration. Also, it maintains the soil surface drier for less issues with fusarium. pH, high pH is ideal, 6.8 to 7.2 for better calcium uptake. And also a low starting EC of about 0.7 works well. If your soil has high salts from maybe a previous crop like chrysanthemum, many growers will put a crop of matricaria or chamomile in there, which tends to clean up the bed, pulls all the salts out and all the excess fungicides, which is a nice way to clean up a bed. And we can see here,
That's a great tip.
yeah, we can see here a nice raised bed ready for transplanting. Here's again another raised bed, keeping that surface dry. Either way, whether it's a raised bed or not, cultivating to a depth of 12 inches is recommended to give good root penetration. And then spacing, generally it's 4 by 5 inches is an ideal spacing for Lisianthus for better air movement and less disease pressure. And because Lisianthus is native to an arid region, it's highly susceptible to botrytis because it's native to an area with very low humidity, and botrytis thrives in high humidity. So many growers will leave the center bed empty for better air movement, which will also maintain the foliage, especially the lower foliage, drier. Another pattern is this, where they put the two rows really close together, leaving a nice open area in between for great air movement and drier foliage. The media, we'll go on with media now. Again, good drainage, highly friable soil with good organic matter so that roots can penetrate nicely. pH again on the high side. It doesn't require really high EC compared to other crops. You can see here, the 1 to 2 is easy to do. 1 part soil to 2 parts distilled water. Let it sit for 30 minutes. The SME is saturated media extract that generally comes from a laboratory. It'd be hard to do a pour through in a cut flower bed, but what you could do is dig up maybe a 6-inch, fill a 6-inch pot of soil and then maybe pour through it. If that's your only option. But again, that soil is really critical to have a good crop. Here's a nice greenhouse ready for transplanting. It has a sandy loam. This is just ideal because it's going to have wonderful drainage for great root penetration, and then that surface is going to dry nicely in between watering for less disease pressure. And if you're looking to improve the soil texture with organic matter, this carbonized or what they call burned rice hulls is ideal. They add nutrients to the soil. They add structure to the soil. They also increase the pH, especially in acidic soils, for better uptake of nutrients. So it can be used to either suppress weeds with top dressing or else incorporate it into the soil for better organic, better rich soil structure. This is available, but you may have to make your own rice hulls, carbonized rice hulls, by burning them yourself if you can't find them on the market. The other option is these parboiled rice hulls. These basically are rice hulls that are steamed, readily available, not very expensive, and they actually do quite a good job of basically replacing something like perlite to add organic matter and soil structure and air porosity to the soil. And you don't want to use anything but either carbonized or parboiled rice hulls because you'll end up with weed seeds or rice seeds, and it's going to be a mess. So yeah, it's worth getting the better product. Then we'll go on with moisture management. And basically, it's recommended that the cut flower bed be watered deeply prior to transplanting. This will allow the roots to penetrate nicely. Those roots are going to go right down looking for moisture, so if there's water down below, they're going to go deeper into the cut flower bed. At the very beginning, though, overhead watering is necessary with a water breaker because those roots haven't engaged into the soil yet, so that those drip irrigators will not really help keep the newly transplanted plug, watered. So overhead irrigation is needed at the beginning. At the beginning, we also recommend having a little bit stress reduction by putting some shade over the plants and increasing the humidity for a better transition into the cut flower bed. And then also keeping that soil surface dry is really critical because fusarium, responds to moisture. So if that soil is dry, it's going to maintain much less disease pressure. And of course, where Lisianthus is native in these arid regions, the soil surface is always dry because they have these long straws that go down to suck up the water as they need it. But that surface remains dry, so imitating that dry surface and its native habit is really a good idea. We can see here, this cut flower bed is excellent. It's a raised bed, has very nice porous soil, but one can see how nice and dry that soil surface is, and there's basically no disease pressure or disease present in the bed. And then here, see the opposite here, this is excess moisture. This soil here probably lacks organic matter. It's not a raised bed. It is recommended, growers recommend inoculating the plugs with azoxystrobin. It basically is really found to counter fusarium. So if the plug grower is not doing this, it's a good recommendation that the grower treat the plugs with azoxystrobin prior to transplanting. And some growers will actually go over the entire cut flower bed, getting all the irrigation tubes and support wires inoculated also. Another option is sub-irrigation. It's a little more work, but burying those irrigation lines underneath the soil can also serve to keep that soil surface dry. Other growers, well, you have narrower cut flower beds, and they will then irrigate the channels in between the cut flower beds so that moisture stays down below for the plants to absorb it. It's a lot easier than having to manage irrigation lines also, so it's a nice option. And then we see overly watered or high moisture with high heat can cause weak flower stems. So we'll see later on toning the plant after flower bud initiation is necessary to avoid weak stems and weak flowers. So managing the moisture is very critical.
And you're also saving on resources. So, giving the plant what it needs, saving resources by water, and saving your labor
Sure.
resources.
And then we'll talk a little about fertilizer. Generally, we find that the CalMag fertilizers work really well at about 150 ppm nitrogen. And these are widely available, things like 15-5-15. Generally, you want to fertilize at the early stages and then cut back at the end. Does not require high amounts of fertilizers compared to other crops. We can see here that the EC target range on the bottom left. And basically, as the flower buds mature and begin to show, you want to reduce and eliminate fertilizing, especially about 4 weeks before color shows on the plant. Another option is to use single element fertilizers. Basically, one requires a double-headed injector because of precipitation in the fertilizer tanks. But this also allows one to apply a 4 potassium to 2 calcium to 1 magnesium ratio, which is ideal for mineral soils. It's because potassium is a monovalent, having 1 positive charge, where calcium and magnesium are bivalents or divalent elements. They have basically 2 positive charges. So you need more potassium to compete with the calcium and the magnesium in the soil for root uptake on the absorption sites on the root. But basically, this can be easily done. The trace elements, it's very important that you use the right trace elements in these tank mixes because chelates don't precipitate with potassium and calcium nitrate, but they do with magnesium sulfate and phosphoric acid, whereas the sulfates of iron, zinc, copper, and manganese precipitate with calcium, potassium nitrate, but not with the magnesium sulfate and the phosphoric acid. Generally, the boron and the molybdenum aren't affected, so they can be put in either tank. And then down below, we have kind of a basic general rule of parts per million that you should target. The irrigation strategy is quite simple. At the beginning, they like more water to establish the root system. And then basically as the crop progresses, you want to have more intervals, longer intervals in between watering to promote deeper penetration of the roots and also to tone the plant and get it ready for the flowers, the flower production. And basically also by giving a little bit of stress, you also tend to help force the plant to transition from the juvenile phase to the generative phase. However, for Voyage series, we recommend steady moisture. It's a little bit of a different genetics that tends to like steady moisture throughout the crop. And then here's a good chart here just to show the different dynamics of Lisianthus. We can see here at the top, the irrigation is heavier at the start and then it gradually tapers off toward the end. Nitrogen, higher at the beginning and slowly as you reduce the fertilizer, lower at the end. The phosphate tends to be, again, like the nitrogen, higher at the start and then kind of tapers off. Potassium, steady throughout the crop. And then we can see temperature starting low and then going high. So again, it's a crop that tends to like to finish with a high temperature and high light. Basically, it germinates in the fall in the native habitat, comes through the winter, and then those Texas summers can be hot and very bright. And then one good indication that you're doing a good job is the internode length should lengthen as the crop progresses. So you should have tighter internodes at the base of the plant and then wider and wider internodes as the crop progresses. That shows the plant is happy and you're giving it what it needs. And one can see.
I did not know that. Oh, that is really a neat thing. That's really cool to observe.
Like when you go to the doctor as a child, they take your height every time, huh? Make sure you're progressing.
Yeah.
Boron deficiency, this can be an issue that many people don't address. Boron and calcium are very, they're competitive, but they also are synergistic, so they need each other. Boron keeps calcium in a soluble form so it can be metabolized by the plant. Generally, you want to apply a quarter ppm, especially in non-mineral soils. But also, you can get brittle plants, brittle leaves, and brittle stems without enough calcium and boron to enable the uptake of these nutrients. Also, either insufficient calcium, a low pH, or too much nitrogen can also cause this. And of course, the pH over 6.5 is best because it allows for greater calcium availability in the soil. And calcium is not a mobile element. It cannot be taken up, brought from lower foliage and brought to the top. So this is why one will see a deficiency at the very top of the plant. Usually a yellowish foliage is a good indication. So again, enough calcium and boron and a well-formed root system is needed. Calcium is also tends to be passively taken up by the plant through transpiration, which is why, Lisianthus is native to an arid region where there's very little humidity, so it pulls up the calcium really nicely because of the good transpiration. Again, with tip burn, this can be related to excess nitrogen, which can suppress calcium from being absorbed by the plant. So again, good ventilation is needed, especially in humid climates where you don't have that great transpiration pull. And then calcium deficiency can sometimes just show up in the flowers, and when people wonder why thy flowers are deformed, well, this can be from too much nitrogen and suppression of calcium. So you don't want to have to see this when you're ready to harvest. So a good strategy is great ventilation. Those Texas prairie winds probably blowing through are helping absorb the calcium nicely. Magnesium. This is something that can be robbed from the lower foliage. It's a mobile element. So one will see a deficiency first in the lower foliage. But magnesium is part of the chlorophyll molecules, so it's really important that it's applied. It works with calcium, but again, it has to be in that nice ratio, because it will compete with calcium also if there's too much. Generally, it's like a 2-to-1 calcium to magnesium ratio in the fertilizer. And some people don't think of this, phosphate. Too much phosphorus can cause really deep green foliage. It can also suppress the height. So if you have a really short crop, you might wonder why, and it could be related to high phosphorus. Potassium excess. Basically, too much potassium can cause a suppression of calcium, and you get these hollow stems because calcium is so important for stem development and cell wall production. So everything has to be good in a good balance to meet the crop's requirements. So let's talk quickly about light and temperature, which is really important for Lisianthus. Light, basically 14 to 18 moles is ideal. To avoid having too short of a plant, they're reckoning about 6,000 foot candles. Of course, outdoors, in the native habit, their plants are getting that great root system very early, and they're getting that really nice jump on height. So they can tolerate the higher lights, but with artificial conditions in the greenhouse, starting with a plug that's older, you need to get that height, to compensate for that. So maintaining maybe a maximum of 7,000 foot candles is ideal for great plant height. And as temperature increases, higher light is needed. So try to maximize photosynthesis by maintaining up to 7,000 foot candles. Another thing that you have to realize is that the plants require UV rays to form sturdy stems and produce those pigments in the flowers. So basically having a poly cover or outdoor production where you get the ultraviolet rays is really needed for Lisianthus. And in the Dutch systems where they have a lot of glass houses, they have that artificial lighting which has the UV rays in them to help them form the flower pigments. Air temperature, basically for the best fast cropping, a minimum of 65 Fahrenheit at night, and then a minimum day temperature of 68, preferably much higher, but growing it cool is not going to work with this crop. It needs high light, high temperature, and good air movement. And then in the winter, growers will apply black plastic because that will help retain higher temperature in the soil. And we know that Lisianthus requires at least 55 degrees Fahrenheit for active growth. So if it gets cooler than 55, the crop's going to shut down. So this use of the black plastic is helpful. In the summer, if you find that it's too high of a radiance, white plastic will also work to keep the soil a little cooler to benefit the root production. And here we see what happens with cool soil. You get that really tight inner nodes at the base because of the cool soil. It's not developing as it should. But basically, the key to Lisianthus is in the root system. So actually, soil temperature, in many respects, is more important than the air temperature. So that's why another reason that raised beds work so nicely is because the raised beds stay warmer because they're getting that heat from three sides of the bed. Low temperature damage. Some people might see these yellow spots, nothing to really worry about. They'll disappear once things warm up. So growers may see this once in a while, but it's just temporary. Again, light intensity. Here's outdoor field production. We can see on the left here, this is group 2. The plants never got above the netting. And then here's one of these newer group 4s. The plants are above. So if you're getting, plugs in and you're going to have high light and above 7,000 foot candles, go with a later group, a higher number, because they will naturally have more nodes to produce and give you better height. So it's just something to consider for outdoor field production. And here's a great option. A lot of the California growers have these nice high tunnels. Diffused light, this is becoming very important. A lot of research out of the Netherlands, because the diffused light gives you much better horizontal and vertical penetration into the plant. It also reduces the leaf temperature a bit for greater photosynthesis. So, if you have the option of putting some kind of cover over the outdoor crop, that's going to give you a overall better growth. And then here's a great slide showing photo period throughout the year. In the northern hemisphere, we can see that Texas, where the Lisianthus is primarily native, is at about a 30-degree latitude. So it has a maximum of about 14 hours of photo period in June. So greater than 12 hours is recommended for faster flower bud initiation and development. Also, the greater the day length, there's more light calories available for the plant to photosynthesize. And then flower bud initiation. Research shows that Lisianthus, the production development is based on an interplay of temperature, photoperiod, and light intensity. So basically, the higher the temperature, the longer the photoperiod, and the greater the light intensity, the faster the plant's going to produce a crop. You're going to have faster cropping. And basically, temperature, we find, is the carburetor for the plant. That is the thing that determines the development the most, especially the development of flowers. And then photoperiod is second, in part due because you're having more light calories, longer hours of sunshine. And then excess light, this is primarily related along with high temperatures. You'll get flower discoloration. So it's recommended that you reduce the light intensity, especially under high temperatures, to prevent flower discoloration. So increase that air movement and vent as much as you can. I haven't seen this as much of an issue in Michigan, where you have cooler climate. You don't seem to have this problem, but under greenhouse conditions with high temperature in the 90s and high light, this can happen. You also can have petal burn, especially from high temperature. It can singe the flowers, so you need to reduce temperature again with some shading. And then also do not apply chemicals under high light conditions and high temperature conditions, because this goes with any crop, but you'll get some petal burns. So apply the chemicals early in the day under cooler conditions. And then support, Lisianthus will need support. Generally, at least one layer of support For outdoor production, I would recommend 2 because you have rain and wind and different conditions in a greenhouse. And I know support wire can be it can be expensive. So if you don't have access to that, you can just run lengths of wire vertically along the bed. And in this grower, just using a very nice heavy thread to make the crossbars based on the spacing of the plants. So if you have a lot of labor, this is actually from Mexico. So this is what they're doing to create their own unique tailored grid system for the Lisianthus. And then here's an option if you are using wire, is to use just get a metal pole at the end. You can then kind of pull the pole to tighten the wire, and then just secure it with that screw there so it can't loosen up. This helps you keep that wire nice and taut so the plants don't fall over. Insects, we have basically 4 major insects. Leaf miners, you got to watch for the visible mines. Thrips, of course, they're vectors of disease. Whitefly can be a problem, so always have nice sticky cards available to capture those. And then worms can also be a problem, especially if you're lighting, because they can attract moths, and those moths like to lay eggs. Okay, here's a photo of leaf miners. They're pretty typical, these mines here. So be careful about those. Thrips, yeah, they're an important pest in many crops, but they also vector INSV. So be sure to manage this well. Here's just a fun slide. I found this in the Netherlands. They had chickens running through the greenhouse eating the worms. So if you have a worm problem, have some chickens to control them.
And a lot of cut flower farmers have chickens, so it goes hand in hand.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah, they're good at finding those worms and insects. So, some disease issues. Basically, we'll go through these. Botrytis, because Lisianthus is native to a dry climate, botrytis is going to be an issue. It's highly susceptible. So great ventilation will be great to have, and also reducing relative humidity with good ventilation and avoiding cool temperatures. Here's some issues with botrytis. You see it mostly on the lower foliage because that's where the moisture tends to condensate because cool air drops and it's cooler down below. You can also have the flower stems here also get it and attack it. Downy mildew, this generally isn't an issue when you have a warm crop, but if you are growing cool, under humid conditions, you may see this. This will form basically underneath the foliage, primarily below temperatures of 59. And as you said earlier, ideally keep that temperature at 65 or higher at night. Fusarium, yeah, this is the bete noire of Lisianthus. It really is the major challenge for most growers. Fusarium oxysporum is the main fungus. It's basically a crown rot. It attacks the stems, usually at the base. And it can also attack the roots. It naturally occurs. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Basically, you'll see the leaves will start to discolor a bit, lose that nice green color, followed by tan flecks. So the good strategy is to get those disease plants out of the greenhouse as fast as possible. Go through and rogue them out before those spores form and spread. But basically starting with good healthy plugs from a good reputable plug supplier, good sanitation, and then removal of those diseased plants is going to really help, as well as starting with clean soil. Here we see Fusarium venosum. This is another type of fusarium that forms pinkish powder. So there's different races out there to be on the lookout for. And you can see this is somewhat the risk of recropping, because you have more, you'd end up with more debris and leftover plant material, and you tend to run the risk of fusarium, especially if you don't have great sanitation and moisture control. You see there wasn't a raised bed here. So if the workers are going through and harvesting and not cleaning up, it can be an issue.
Yep. It's hard to clean. It's hard to get in there and clean up all the waste product after harvest, that's for sure. And a lot of it does get left behind. So your advantages of seeking that second crop could really be a long-term disadvantage.
You're right. And it's growers think they're saving money, but in the long run, I think starting fresh with a clean cut flower bed that's been seam sterilized and great plugs, they're going to grow and give you that nice long stem. I think you're money ahead to start new every time.
Yeah. Start clean, stay clean.
That's true. And I know Joan mentioned this earlier. This is a grower in California that has a large property. So what he does is he moves his greenhouses, his high tunnels, every year to a new ground. He has enough ground that he can do this for 6 years. So he just keeps going one direction with the high tunnels, and he starts with new soil. So if that is an option, if you have a large cut flower operation that maybe only has maybe 1/10 is Lisianthus, you can rotate and move the crop around. It is an option. But for those who have, permanent greenhouses, steam sterilization is a good investment. Viruses, this can be an issue too with Lisianthus, especially INSV. Basically destroy the plants once you see them. So if any thrips were around, then they won't be able to spread it. You can see here it affects the terminals also. You get that stunting and collapse of the plant. Also, good sanitation, not only inside the greenhouse, but around the greenhouse. Keep these weeds away. Have a nice barrier to keep those insects out of the greenhouse. And there's also cucumber mosaic virus, which are carried by aphids. You'll get striping on the foliage and the flower petals. And then powdery mildew, you often see this mostly after harvest, but if you have high humidity and cool temperatures, you can end up with problems with powdery mildew. And using sleeves that are aerated, that have perforated holes to allow the plants, obviously don't, one good thing is not to put warm Lisianthus stems into a cooler right away. Let the stems cool down after harvesting in a nice shady area, because then you won't have moisture forming on the foliage and forming powdery mildew. And then harvesting, this is the fun part where we get to see the fruits of our labor. And generally Lisianthus is harvested with at least one open flower, especially for long distance shipping. Generally, the local growers like to cut with more open flowers, so there's a nicer presentation. And sometimes they'll take that first flower off and use it in the corsage work for weddings, which is a nice option. And also definitely need to treat the stems after harvesting with sucrose and holding solutions. And there's many on the market, some specific for Lisianthus. Ethyl block is also a good option, especially for long distance shipping, because they are ethylene sensitive. This is a nice product. It's like a gas that's released, and it basically it takes the places of the ethylene receptors on the plant, so the ethylene cannot get into the plant. Storage, you can store them for a few days, but not really long. Otherwise, you reduce the vase life, especially if you do it for more than a week. They can be stored wet and dry, or dry for a few days, but if they're going to do it more than a few days, you need to put them in the water to maintain the vase life. And just briefly, just to go through Sakata's main categories, we have Echo, which is group 1, a nice double flower standard type. Rosanna is a unique series with unique colors. The stigmas do not develop, so you have longer vase life. They cannot pollinate or reproduce and form seeds. And then Mariachi is a group 2. This is a nice quadruple flower, really a lot of petals. An older series, but still very popular, especially for outdoor production. The Voyages is a newer group. This is the one that likes steady moisture in the production. It has a fringed flower. It has nice, what we call top flowering, as most of the buds, as many new hybrids are, they all form at the top of the plant. So for really nice stacked, we call that stacked look in the cut flower. And then the Rositas, this is a group 1s through 3, depending on the season. It's a smaller rose form with great botrytis resistance for shipping and good vase life. And then the newest one we have is called Solo. Kind of a step back. It's a single type, but it's pollen free. So it has really nice vase life, up to 21 days is not unusual. Nice for those kind of restaurant tabletop vases, something you want, something kind of simple.
We had grown the Solo here in West Chicago out in the field, and it really took a lot of weather extremes. We had a downburst, which was probably very close to a tornado, where it leveled a lot of the sunflowers, and the Solo stood up to it. The petals were so thick that it really just was not really influenced by weather. I think the single flowers can get underrated because everybody is looking for that quadruple or that giant flower. But I think if you're an outdoor flower farmer, I think solos really do need to be considered, and the amount of production, how it fills a bouquet, I think it's really breathtaking and durable.
Yeah, and sometimes the singles add nicely with other double flowers because they give it a contrast of shape and form. So. But yeah, you can see how you can also combine large flowers with smaller flowers. This is Rosita combined with Voyage, so it makes a really nice, pleasing combination. So mix and match to your heart's desire. And
I like that one.
so yeah, I appreciate your attention and Ball Seed for allowing us to do our presentation. And yes, Ball Seed is a great cut flower resource for all your needs. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Joan, do you have anything to add? I know we just saw some really cool varieties and all the different forms and colors that you mentioned at the beginning. Is there anything you want to mention to wrap us up?
To me, it's just amazing. I mean, Bob, your information is so valuable. And even veterans to the cut flower world, there's little tips and tricks everywhere here throughout your presentation, and I think it's just absolutely fantastic. So, I mean, I can't thank you enough. I mean, what a resource, and so wonderfully presented, setting people up for great success for a great year.
And I completely agree. And both of you, thank you so much for sharing all this information for growers in the greenhouse and in the field. I think even some of the information you shared is just fantastic, just general best practices for growers. And I do think some of the things to touch on, you mentioned the popularity is soaring, and it makes a lot of sense when you showed a lot of these varieties from Sakata's range. The colors, the flower forms, just absolutely stunning. But we do need to remember it is a technical crop.
Yep.
And it is from arid regions in the Southwest. So there are a lot of nuances to be aware of, and defending against the fusarium is certainly key, and transplanting those plugs quick so that you get off to a strong start.
Exactly.
And all sorts of other information that you've shared throughout, Bob. Thank you so much.
The reminder of the best practices, the reminder of what to do, and making sure that this is kept a priority crop. And again, the continuation of start clean, stay clean, ventilation, reminding everybody of those tips and tricks that are really crucially important, but then of course the beauty of the crop as it is. I mean, your new varieties, getting into the terracotta colors and the innovation is so appreciated.
Yeah, thank you again. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity.
And remember, you can find hundreds of videos on Ball Seed's YouTube page, organized into handy playlists covering a variety of topics. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss a new video. And on behalf of Joan and Bob and the teams at Ball Seed and Sakata, have a great season.